So now we have with us our next masterclass, the final masterclass for the day, and which is by Sandrine Bardot. She's a trainer and consultant from the Bardot Group, based out of the UAE, expert in the region on Comp and Ben. Please allow me to welcome Sandrine. Hi, Sandrine.
Hello.
Hello, happy to see you. How are you doing?
Good to see you too. Doing good. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, wonderful. So happy to have you. Thank you so much for supporting HRM Summit over the years. Very, very happy to have you back.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So allow me a few minutes, Sandrine. Let me introduce you to the audience and then you can take over.
Sure.
So Sandrine joining us is an award-winning Comp and Ben expert. She boasts of a 27-year-old career in the field of total rewards. She has held senior positions in Comp and Ben with Microsoft, Airbus, Apple, Philips, Fiat, and many other organizations, which led her to be a global head of performance and reward at Majid Al Futtaim and Mubadala in the UAE. She established her company, the Bardot Group, in 2013, offering specialized Comp and Ben consulting, training, and keynote speaking services, mostly throughout the GCC, Asia, and Africa. As part of her outreach to educate the HR community, she authors a blog, compensationinsider.com, with over 290 articles published to date, inspiring HR leaders and practitioners on topics related to the employee value proposition. She's also a regular speaker at HR conferences and in-house events. She's most definitely a regular speaker at HRM Summit for years, and we are so glad to have an expert like her every single year, sharing her insights and the latest in Comp and Ben. So once again, Sandrine, very, very warm welcome, and happy to share this platform with you.
Thank you, Helen, and welcome everybody. So that was a wonderful introduction. Thanks a lot. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So I attended the previous two workshops today, and have to say I found them really inspirational. You know, careers in HR and also the culture. So my topic is a little bit of a more technical topic today. I wanted to talk about balanced compensation. So what can we do in terms of Comp and Ben in order to be competitive, but not to spend too much? As you know, since last year, the situation has changed quite a lot. I think for most organizations nowadays, we're not in the same kind of challenging position as maybe last year, and but companies still need to be cost conscious of what they're doing as they navigate the new world where we hear about the Great Resignation and so on. So my goal today, obviously in 1 hour and a half, I cannot give you all the answers, but I want to try and drive your attention to a number of elements or things that you can try to think of, which will help you to be competitive and attractive and keep your employees, but at the same time, not spend hopefully huge amounts of money. So we'll talk about base pay, we'll talk about variable pay, engagement and retention, benefits, and then if we have time, we'll talk for just 1 or 2 minutes about the future. Sorry, I went a little bit too quick. So as I was explaining to you, the environment has changed, and what we have seen is that organizations do need to adapt to the environment. And obviously, first we have the, let's say, economic environment that we have seen. So obviously the pandemic with its ups and downs depending on your industry. I think it has been a bit more difficult to access credit facilities for a lot of organizations. We've seen a lot of automation and digitization. Sorry. But we also see that employees have different expectations of what they want to find in the workplace. We find that the younger generations change a job more often. There is less trust between the employers and the employees. Sorry. A more focused request on people wanting to have more work-life balance. And as I was mentioning earlier, things around the Great Resignation. So depending where you are and depending your industry, you might not be facing all of those and all of those at the same, let's say, a degree of importance, but they all have an impact in how your organization should react and adapt. And we all have tried to adapt the ways of working. We sent a lot of people to work from home and so on. We have much more capacity as an organization to change than, and I think that was one of the good things that came out of the pandemic, this realization that we can change as an organization. Even in companies that were very traditional and might not always be very open to making some changes, we saw that when the circumstances require it, they had to do it and they did it. So I think that we will be able to reflect that, including in Comp and Ben, which tends to be an area which often remains more slow sometimes to react than other aspects of human resources, for example. So just very quickly here, we see the World at Work model of total rewards. World at Work is the largest compensation and benefits association in the world. It used to be called American Compensation Association. It's a global, mostly American, but global association. And as you can see, there are 5 elements in the total reward strategy, which are compensation, benefits, development, recognition, and well-being. So I'm going to be talking about most of those elements today, just to give you a hint of where you can pay attention and where maybe you can focus to introduce some changes if you need to react to how the environment is impacting your organization. So in this model, that's a different way of showing the same concept as the World at Work model. This one comes from the CIPD. And what they're saying is that in a model of total reward, you would have financial rewards, such as the compensation, the variable pay. You would have benefits. You would have learning and development. That's the same part as development. And then the quality of the working environment would have things around the well-being and recognition. And what we see is that different groups of employees might have different motivations and also at different stages in their life. So obviously, what's going to happen is that it's not one size fits all. So if I talk today about a possible potential solution, I don't want you to run with it if that's not what's right for your organization. Best fit is always more important than best practice. That's one of the things that I always emphasize during the trainings that I deliver. But I want to help to spark your own creativity. So as we get into managing base pay, there are different elements that we can influence and where you can have control over the cost, but also control over how to make it more attractive to the employees. The first of those is how you're handling your salary increases process, which is probably at the moment you're all trying to figure out what are the current salary increase trends for 2022 and trying to budget for next year. And a lot of organizations put in place a merit matrix in order to handle their salary reviews. And the salary matrix, the merit matrix, looks at the position of the employee in their salary range for their own grade. And so here it's divided in 4 different quarters. Let's say if you have a salary structure which is plus or minus 20% around the midpoint, and looks at the performance level of the employees. So in this example, there are 3 performance levels. above the expectations, meeting the expectations, and below the expectations. And you try to create a merit matrix where you say, hey, the lowest paid you are in your own salary range. So those kind of low compa ratio position in the salary range, 0.8 to 0.9. And if you're having high performance, you should receive a salary increase which is bigger than that of somebody who is not meeting the expectation, but who is also already highly paid comparative to their salary range for their own grade. That's the classic way of doing the merit matrix, but there are things that you can do in order to play with this merit matrix, where you can try to emphasize a few things that will be helping you to keep your best employees, for example. So looking at this same example, I have the same merit matrix, but here I have 5 performance levels, from 1, which is the lowest, poor performance, to 5, which is outstanding performance. And if you want to see the difference compared to the previous slide, first of all, as you can see, it's not a single number which is put in each cell, it's a range. And it means that you give the managers the opportunity for an employee, let's imagine, for example, rated 4, so above the expectations, but not yet outstanding, who's, let's say, in just below the midpoint of their salary range. The manager can decide to give between 6 and 7% of salary increase, for example. And as you can see here, we have ways where we can give more, so for the top performing employees. And as you can see, there's a kind of a big difference between the employee in rating 4, for example, in this cell of 0.9 to 1, and the employee with the same position in their salary range, but a rating of 5. There's 1.5% more. So you can differentiate to give more to your most outstanding employees, so that really you send a strong message to this employee population that you're happy with them and that you want to recognize their performance. You could see as well that you have a second priority here, which is your employees who are doing better than expectations, but are at the bottom of their salary range, by giving them as well kind of a bigger increase than what would be a kind of a normal, because if I follow here my structure, I would be giving 7 to 8, and you can decide to say, for example, 8.5 to 9.5. If your employee population is distributed, let's say normally, which means that first of all, your salary range reflects the reality of market pay. You are using the full salary range. So not all your employees are paid at the bottom of the salary range. Not all your employees are paid at the top of the salary range. If you do have, let's say, performance ratings that kind of are not all masked either at the top or all in the middle, then you can definitely differentiate, because it's not going to affect a huge number of people, but it will affect, by this green and this blue, will affect your top performing employees, and you want to recognize those. And you could also say, but I want to do some cost savings, and the people who are barely not even meeting the expectations, I still give them just enough to cover, for example, the inflation, the cost of inflation, but I don't give them more. And if they're already paid about the median of their salary range, I don't give them anything, because they're not meeting expectations. They're already paid more than the market value, so there's no need for me to increase the salary of those people, because they did not perform. So as you can see, you can play with your merit matrix to still remain with a budget, but really focus the payment on the employees that are bringing the most value to the organization. And as you can see, for example, here's a slightly even more unconventional matrix. You still have the performance rating, but here you have a market ratio. And the market ratio means the position to the market. It's not how much the employee is paid compared to their own salary range. It's how they're paid compared to the market, which means that in order to calculate that, you need to have participated to a salary survey and have received that information. And as you can see in this example is the market ratio is split in 3 equal parts, not in 4 equal parts, because you want to have a focus around the middle of the salary range. 0.95 to 1.05 means people who are paid 5% more or 5% less than the midpoint, which is the market value. And that means that all your employees that are in this column, basically, you're kind of paying them where they should be with respect to the market values. But as you can see here, we have a range that the manager can give, which is much wider. It's like 4% here in this example, for example, in rating 5 with 0.8 market ratio, the budget would be 12% and the manager can give 11 to 15%. So much more autonomy for line managers to spend, and you still have a number of 12%, which means that the manager can give more than 12% to the employee in that cell, but that means that they will have to give the minimum to a lot of the other people there, and because they want to recognize that 1% that they have here. So you have given them more flexibility, you're not spending more, but you have a really differentiated. So as you can see, really, just by the design of your merit matrix, you can already control your cost, but make sure that you're trying to retain your best people. So in terms of base pay, there are a number of other things that you can influence. You can change your target position to market. Most organizations say that they want to be competitive or paying at market, which means that they're paying at the median of the market. But you could also identify, for example, that you have one division or one job family, which is absolutely crucial for the organization. And for that specific job family, you want to position them maybe higher than the median of the market. You want to position them at the 60th percentile or at the 75th percentile, meaning that, for example, at 75th percentile, you pay more than 75% of people in the market. So you're a good payer for that specific employee population. This will not have a massive cost increase for the organization, but will help you to attract and to retain the employees under the job families that are really crucial for the future of your organization, for example. Another thing that you can do as well is to play with the ratio between your fixed pay and your variable pay. And you're not necessarily changing the whole amount that the person can earn. But for example, for your sales population, depending how your sales incentive plan is designed, they might be happy to receive a little bit less on their fixed pay in order to have a higher opportunity if they believe that they can achieve the numbers and even overachieve on the numbers, the quotas that you set for them. That would mean for them that overall they have a bigger earning, and for you that you have sold more. So you might be spending a little bit more, but you've actually generated more income by changing that ratio of variable pay to fixed pay and enabling your sales population to be motivated by that aspect. Well, obviously, you can also look at your allowances, how you're going to handle them, though I have to say, I think that this is kind of a theoretical question. I was attending the presentation from Mercer a few days ago on their annual salary survey result for 2021 in the UAE. And they were saying that even though at the beginning of the year, a lot of people were saying, oh, the market is starting to move for the housing. Should we increase the housing? Should we reduce the transportation as people are working from home and they're not using transport to go to the office and so on? Their numbers are showing that actually the percentage of allowances as a part of the guaranteed pay has not changed. So overall, the allowances have not really changed. But if you really wanted to, you could also look into those to see what you can do in terms of cost control. The final element that I wanted to talk about in terms of managing base pay is how you're going to handle promotions. And I want to spend just a few minutes on promotions because this is so important. You've just had a year and a half where a lot have been thrown to people. There are some people that really stepped up to the challenge, whether you were in a phase of massive expansion. So let's imagine you were manufacturing I don't know, you were manufacturing, let's say, not say mask, but sanitizer, for example. Obviously, your business completely exploded thanks to the pandemic. Or it could be that you were in a worse situation because of the pandemic, and some of your employees have absolutely stepped up. And last year, the salary reviews, and this year, the salary reviews in 2021 were much lower than what they used to be in the past. And very few organizations actually paid attention to properly assessing how they were going to reward some of the employees that really helped them to survive during those trying few months. And I think that promotions are going to be a massive thing that you need to look into, because if people have been working their butt off for the past 18 months and they see that nothing is coming, they are going to vote with their feet, and this great resignation, you are going to hear from it. So there are a number of things that you can do in terms of promotion, but I'd like to talk especially about the eligibility framework in terms of who is eligible to promotion. So first of all, just a clarification, because sometimes in this part of the world, I think that we tend to misunderstand what eligibility to promotion means. Being eligible to promotion as an employee means that you are meeting the minimum criteria to be considered for a promotion. It does not mean that you get a promotion automatically. And I think that this is really important to clarify, because as much as maybe in the beginning of a career, you might have some people who are expecting promotions on a regular basis, you know, like every 2 years and so on, for like kind of minimal effort. The reality is that for true promotions to take place, you need to have a certain number of criteria that are met, and then you may or you may not receive. So some of the common criteria for this eligibility, obviously, a lot of organizations will say, oh, you need to have been in your current job or in your current grade for at least, I don't know, 1 year for a junior position, 18 months, 2 years, sometimes for 5 years, you know, for a promotion to a senior management level, for example, before we can even consider you for a promotion. So the time or tenure in the current job or grade is a hurdle. It's you need to pass through this first before the next criteria can be applied. And then usually you're going to have a criteria which is related to performance. And let's say the most common criteria would be you need to have a performance rating of at least meeting expectations or higher. Or some companies will also say you can't have a rating of below expectations in the past 2 years. And then some companies will have, you know, an evaluation model based on competencies to see if you have at least, I don't know, let's say 70% of the competencies for the next job at the right level. Some companies will consider a manpower plan. Is there a position available? So that's not necessarily something which is necessary for all positions, because moving from junior accountant to accountant is not such a massive change of role. But from senior accountant to accounting manager, if there's already somebody in the job of accounting manager, there's not a position available. So the individual who's the senior accountant might be eligible under all other criteria, but if there isn't a position, then you cannot promote that person. And so there are ways that you can work with those criteria for the eligibility, so that if you need to focus on not having that much budget, but you still want to make sure that you're rewarding, you can play with those criteria. For example, one of the things you could say is, instead of staying on your job for 1 year before you become eligible to a promotion, we're going to make it now 1.5 years or 2 years. And this is quite a relevant example, because I recently gave a training, and one of my delegates was telling me that in Saudi Arabia recently the government had to talk about that you could not poach one employee from one company to another in the semi-government entity if they hadn't been on their job for at least 1 year. So as you can see, there was an element, because very often when people change jobs is to take a bigger role, there's an element trying to restrict that. Maybe you can also say that they need to have had a performance rating which was above meeting the expectations for 2 years in a row. Maybe if you really don't have much money, you say only the high potentials can become eligible to promotion. Maybe you target, I don't know, the nationals, you say we will give 60% of all the promotions will be for the nationals and only 40% for the expats. Or maybe even if you really, really need to control your cost, you focus just on your most critical population only, which might already be the one that has a different target position to market. So for example, your sales population, your R&D population, I don't know which one. So you can really be creative and play around this kind of criteria in order to still have an opportunity for some people to be recognized for their past effort, their performance, the enlargement that they have had in their responsibilities, because lots of people, you know, when there were furloughs and people were laid off, the colleagues who stayed behind had to take on the job that was done by other people before. So their own position has enlarged. So you will have to recognize that. So you can play with those criteria if you need to. So the second step, I would say, is to manage variable pay. And one of the things that you need to think about is that you can have more than one incentive at a time. And for most of us, we know that, because we know that we have sales incentive plan and the annual incentive for other employees. And so you could have a model whereby you have multiple incentives that some populations become eligible to, but not eligible to other incentives. So if you look at this, this example shows you, for example, that if you have a spot award, which is an instant small payment that the manager can give to an employee, this is here in the green box, you see that, for example, in that company, you have production people are eligible to it, business support, and the individual contributors, so the professionals and experts are all eligible to that. But as you can see, on top of that, the professionals and your white collars, your employees in the office, are going to be eligible as well to the annual incentive, which is the gray box, okay? While, for example, the production employees are not eligible to that. So you can look into the eligibility to the various incentives that exist into your organization to make sure that you don't have the wrong overlap, that you're not paying twice for the same type of criteria and so on. So if that cleanup has not been done in your organization, I would really suggest that you start paying attention to that, just if only to avoid having similar criteria in different incentives that somebody might be eligible to. So let me give you a very specific example. Here in the management, as you can see, the senior group manager level is eligible to the annual incentive because it's part of the gray box, but it's also eligible to the long-term incentive. So as a long-term incentive, that senior group manager population has an annual bonus plus the long-term incentive. You don't want to have the same criteria on both of those incentives, otherwise those people will be paid twice for good results or will be penalized twice when the objectives are not reached. So it's really important that you try to pay attention to that. And that would be an overspending for you if you are, you know, paying twice for the same kind of objective. So when you're designing your incentives, just my quick tip is to focus on the 3 M's, okay? The 3 most important decision in terms of incentive design. First is the mix. So the ratio between your base salary to the variable pay. So what is the target bonus that you can give to somebody? Then the measures, so which kind of KPIs or performance metrics are we going to use for that specific incentive? How does that align with the strategy? How does that align with the position that the people who are on this incentive are in? It has to be fully aligned. Otherwise, it's out of their control. And if it's out of their control, you're rewarding or not rewarding for something on which they have no influence. The line of sight, it's called the line of sight, is the conviction that an employee has that they can influence the result by which their performance is evaluated, and therefore their bonus is paid, or calculated and paid out to them, has to exist. Because if you give objectives to employees, irrespective of their level in the organization, and they feel that they can't have an influence on that, it's like wasting your time and wasting your money, because they're not even going to start making an effort to try and reach those objectives. And the final M that you need to focus on when you're redesigning your incentive plan is the mechanics, okay? So the formula that you're going to use to transfer this performance to pay. So there is one mechanic which is always there, which is if you reach 100% of the objectives, you should receive 100% of the target bonus. That's the logic. But for example, you might have minimum requirements to be met before you start doing a payment. That's called a hurdle. You might have accelerators for if people are reaching above the expectations and doing more than their objectives. You will have maybe a cap, which is a maximum payment, or no cap, depending on the type of position. All of those elements which help you to calculate how much is going to be paid out at the end of the performance period, so are going to be important. And by the way, I'm saying performance period because this principle of looking after the 3 M's applies for annual incentive, short-term incentive plan, as well as it does apply for a long-term incentive plan. It doesn't matter if you're going to evaluate performance over a 3-year period or over a monthly period. Let's imagine for a monthly commission scheme, you need to have that kind of connection and that mechanics that you're going to use. So if I look into sales incentive plan a little bit more specifically, I think that one of the things that last year a lot of companies were struggling, they were like, oh, we don't know if our salespeople are going to reach the objectives or not. Should we freeze the payment? Should we make guaranteed payments, and so on? You've all had to deal with that last year. Fine, fair enough. As 2021 unfolded, I think that the one constant that we have all faced is that nothing is constant, and that maybe predictability and looking at past models was a little bit difficult in order to establish where should be the targets and so on. So in this slide, I think what you really need to remember is that, okay, the plan mechanics, okay, that's the final line here, the green one at the bottom. Do we need to have goals that are quarterly instead of annual? Do we need to have more KPIs so that we can focus and reward our people for other things than just the core of 2 or 3 objectives that quotas that they were supposed to deal with? Do we need to make a plan which is more simple? You also need to look at a whole bunch of other things. And especially if you're going to look at how you're going to reach out to the market, what kind of positions are you going to have? Are you going to have more people in call centers trying to do inbound sales or outbound sales, depending? So inbound is when they are receiving the calls from the clients who say, I want to order product X. Outbound is them making calls to clients, whether they are business to business or business to consumer, and trying to sell online. Do you need to have people who are more specialized? Do you need to have more people who focus on the major accounts and a different way to pay the, let's say, the more generalist sales population and so on? So you will really need to think about this whole structure of how you want sales to be organized, and that how will that impact the way that you are then designing at the end the mechanics of the plan. But you really need to have that whole thinking with your sales management about, is our sales model structure, the structure of our sales organization still adapted to the sales model that we need to have and that we think is going to evolve in the coming months and years. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, this is from last year, but I think that it's still quite relevant for a lot of industries that maybe still struggle until this year. The organizations were looking to add restart seller incentives. And so the seller incentives are additional things that you do inside your sales incentive plan to motivate your sales population. So for example, they do, the 25% of organizations were saying, we'll do a special contest or a spiff. And a spiff is, I had a question in another presentation the other day. A spiff is like, for example, if you're coming to the end of the quarter and you know that you're selling, I don't know, cell phones, for example, and you know that the model of the cell phone that your people are selling is going to be changed in the coming 2-3 months, you might do a spiff to try and push your salespeople to sell more of the stock, because you don't want to keep too much of the stock of the what you know is going to be soon the old model, because people will want the new model. So you do a special on top of the normal incentive plan, kind of a challenge. And you say, for the person who sells more than so many phones or who sells the most, we will give them something extra. And as you can see, a lot of organizations were looking at as well at changing the quotas, changing the thresholds, which is the minimum requirement, paying out more. So like, for example, for 100%, 120% of performance, it might be that in the last year, you were paying 150% of target bonus, and maybe now the company is saying we're going to pay 175%. So we're going to pay more for the same level of performance because we know it's more difficult and so on. But they were also putting buyer incentives, and I think this is something which is quite important. We don't really talk about it much in HR, but I think that as you design a sales incentive plan, you need to be working very closely with the sales management to understand all the other things that they're doing to try and incentivize the clients to buy more. So those can be, as we can see here, for example, better terms and conditions, discounts, better terms in the contract, you know, bundles and things like that, which will incentivize people or companies to buy your product or your service again. So if you have those in place, they might have an impact, and that's what is hoped, on the achievement of your sales force. So you need to understand how that might play in order to not, for example, accelerate too much on the payout, but also to not undermine the effort that has been reached through reaching out to the buyers, to the customers. So it's also important that you look into that. So my point being here that as much as heads of HR or heads of comp and ben get involved into incentive design, it is not our job to define what the KPIs should be. Okay, at which level they should be set. This is a discussion between the finance team, if they are doing the forecasting, or the product team, if they are the ones doing the forecasting, and the sales team. But we need still to be involved with them in order to understand the overall environment so that we can adapt the way that we're designing our incentive plans to make sure that they give the best opportunity possible for our salespeople to achieve their objectives, get a good reward, because the company is also benefiting from that. If your sales employees become demotivated and don't even try to sell, you are going to be hurting. So it's a fake saving to try and say, oh, let's not do this, let's not do that additional because it's going to cost us money. No, you can do your calculations alongside with sales operations or finance to see and do scenarios to see if this element increases, how much would it cost us more, how much would the profit increase, is it worth it or not, and you base your decisions not on position which is like a philosophical position, but really based on those simulations and those scenarios that you can run to help you anticipate what would be the financial outcome. So let me give you an example of one of my previous clients. So basically this organization, they were doing oil and gas for engines, motor engines, okay? And as you all know, in a few years, you know, most new cars will all be electric, and so we will move away from the thermic engines. And the thermic engines require a lot more lubricant than electric engines. Okay, so obviously this company said, oh, we have a big challenge coming in the next 10 to 15 years. And what they did is that they identified new markets where thermic engines may remain relevant for longer period of time, such as, for example, you know, massive trucks that are mining in the mining industry, you know, digging the holes in the ground and things like that. And what they did as well is that they developed new products to move into certain sectors that will become more strategic in the coming few years, like, for example, entertainment, you know, lifestyle. So they identified, for example, that jet skis would still require, you know, lubricants. So they wanted to push on those. And so they went to the sales force. The senior management said, hey, guys, this is the new priority. You need to sell more to those specific industries. You need to sell those new products as well. But nothing happened. Okay, the shift of the products that the sales force was selling, they remained constant into selling the same old products that they were selling through, you know, garages and car franchises and so on. They were not shifting to the new products, and they were not shifting to the new sectors. And another challenge that they were having is that they were not focusing on teamwork. So that company mostly had at the time a commission plan. So a commission which was based on the number of cubic liters of lubricant that they were selling on a annual basis. And they decided to change. We did a major change in how the sales incentive plan was put in place. So basically, they used to have people who had different titles across the organization, such as sales reps and business development managers, but they were all really doing the same job. They had a basic pay, which was very low compared to the market, 1/3 to half of what the market was paying in terms of basic pay. And market, I'm talking of other sales positions. So sales people tend to already have a basic pay, which is lower than most of employees because they have a high variable pay. And then, as I was saying, they were having a sales commission, which was based on volume, and then with no cap. And so their total real pay was typically 1.3 times the market. So even for a normal performing sales person, once they had their actual payment, the way that it was designed was paying them 1.3 times, 1/3 more than the market. So what we did, we made a lot of changes to that organization. First, we worked on the jobs, and we really created different job descriptions for the farmers and the hunters. So the farmers are the people who have a list of accounts that they go to, and they have repeat sales, and it's kind of predictable. You can anticipate very well in terms of forecasting how much they are going to sell. And then you have the hunters that we decided, okay, we're going to put some people whose job it will be to go for those new markets. And they have very different set of skills, different set of competencies than farmers. Those are the people that we wanted to go after, those new industries and trying to sell those new products. The other thing that we looked at is a redesign of how pay was structured, and we aligned the basic pay to the market practice, which means that we increased the guaranteed pay. Okay, we increased the target pay. We created a target bonus, which we used to have a commission. And in this sales incentive plan, which was based on quotas, we had still a sales volume like in the past as one of the quotas, but we gave another at least one quota, sometimes two. The one was about either selling on new products or getting into new accounts, which obliged the salespeople to pay attention to either selling those new products or those new accounts, because now all of a sudden their compensation was tied into reaching. And you can still make 50% of the sales incentive plan tied to the sales volume, and 50% selling, let's say you choose the new product, for example, to new product, even if the actual target of selling new product is much lower than the other quota, but it can still be a significant part of the payment for the sales population. And that's how you can help them to focus on selling those new products or going to those new accounts. Another thing that we did is that we tried to model the system so that our top 10 performers would still be paid above the market, but not 1.3 times, so 35% more than the market, but that they would be paid at the 75th percentile. So the top performers would still be paid high compared to the market, but not completely disconnected with what the market was doing. And the final thing that we did is that in order to encourage teamwork, we introduced a semi-annual extra payment linked to either a regional or to national sales achievement, so that people would start to work more together and support one another, because they would all be impacted by that payment. So as you can see, we completely changed the way that we designed our sales incentive plan. And we actually saved some money, but we also became more effective for the organization. There were other challenges over there. There were trade unions in Germany and in France that we had to deal with and so on. But in terms of the incentive plan, you can really change the way that you're approaching the design of your sales incentive to really make it focus more in alignment with the strategy of the organization. And I hope this example has demonstrated that properly. So the other thing that some organizations in the GCC are going to think about is their long-term incentive plan. So I know that most organizations do not have long-term incentive plans as per the classic, let's say, stock option plan that a lot of the multinationals are giving out. In our part of the world, let's say GCC-owned organizations, when they do have a long-term incentive plan, tend to have it more focused on cash payment rather than on stock options or equity. But I think that if you do have in place a long-term plan, you need to really make sure that you don't have a knee-jerk reaction when you're designing it or redesigning it, because those plans can have a massive impact on the organization, and you really need to think about long-term, because you're evaluating performance not over a hiccup in the grand scheme of things of 1 year when there is the pandemic, but you really need to look at performance over a period of years, and also performance compared to peers is very, very important. So how you're doing compared to your competitors that are in a similar situation to you. Okay, so you will have to really understand and make sure that you're making 100% alignment between your business strategy, your compensation philosophy, and the way that you're going to design your long-term incentive plan. So I read an article on the corporate governance, corporate law and governance forum of Harvard. And they were talking about a certain number of principles that you need to think about to if you're going to review your long-term incentive plan. So you need to make sure that you understand what's the purpose of making the change. You need to make sure that, and I think that's one of the most important points, that there's proper alignment between all the stakeholders, because everyone's impacted by the long-term incentive plan. So it's not just about your shareholders, but you also need to look at making sure that, you know, the regulators, if you're on the stock exchange, are going to be happy. You might be, for example, in the financial industry, and there are some regulations and rules that you need to follow when you're designing your long-term incentive plans and so on. So you really need to take all of that into account. And you need to make sure that there is proper accountability throughout the plan. A big challenge of changing a long-term incentive plan, which is typically a 3-year performance evaluation period. If there is 1 year which is bad, like we had in 2020 with COVID, how do you justify to the shareholders, how do you justify to the investors that you want to change the long-term incentive plan of the executives if that's just 1 year out of 3 years? So you will really have to make sure that you can demonstrate that any changes that you make still have some accountability for senior leadership in terms of the performance of the organization, irrespective if you want to do it based on KPIs that are financial, that are, customer-centric or whatever. But you need to really look into this kind of criteria and convince the institutions that, especially if you're on the stock exchange, the institutions, the proxy advisors, they're told to support the changes that you want to make, because otherwise the shareholders might vote negatively on the presentation of your long-term incentive plan. Because when companies are on the stock exchange in most countries, they have to present the long-term incentive plan and to get a vote on it by the shareholders. Shareholders receive guidance and advice from those proxy advisors that tell them, hey, we think you should support this plan, or we think this plan is too generous for the executives. We're shielding them from all the problems. We've seen a big shift in 2020 and 2021 in the mentality, even of shareholders. What happened is that because the stock exchange crashed and so on, a lot of people were hurt, of shareholders were hurt. And of course, we saw that employees were also hurt because they were losing their job or being placed on unpaid leave and so on. And it was maybe the first time that there was a kind of a consciousness that why should we shield the executives from the consequences of the crisis when the other stakeholders are not shielded from the consequences of the crisis? So why should the CEO still receive his bonus? How is he more special than all the employees? How is he more special than the shareholders? And this is kind of new. There was an article, I think it was in May this year, in the Financial Times that was discussing that, and that showed that we had big companies like, I think it was Starbucks and was it IBM? I'm not sure, who had received a negative say on pay vote. So the shareholders had voted against the measures that they wanted to put in place for executive pay. And the challenge of that, those votes are not binding. So if a company receives a negative vote, it can still implement the plan that it wants to implement. But the statistics show that most of the companies that have had a negative say on pay vote, so negative vote from the shareholders, tend to underperform their peers on the stock exchange, in the Standard & Poor's 500, for example. So there is a correlation between presenting those incentive plans, long-term incentive plans, getting them not supported by the shareholders, and the financial situation, the probability of the financial situation of the organization in the coming few months. And by the way, a negative say on pay is when you get less than 70 or 80% of the shareholders who vote in favor. So negative doesn't mean it's below 50%, it means it's below 70 or 80% of those shareholders who vote to say, yes, the plan is good. So just to remind you that it's not just a question of shielding the executives, you really need to look at your bigger picture when you're redesigning your long-term incentive plan. Okay, so one of the things that I want to highlight to you is that on top of that, there are other types of incentive schemes that can be very relevant for the organization. So for example, profit sharing. And I really like that one in times, especially in times of crisis, because basically a profit sharing is a self-funded plan. It's a plan where you say as an organization, I'm going to redistribute X% of my profit to the employees above X million or X percentage of my revenue or whatever. So it is self-funded. You can still exclude the poor performers from receiving, but what will happen is that most of the time, the distribution of the sum of money is going to be based on the salary of the employee, and will maybe vary based on the grade or the tenure in the company, but typically based on salary. And of course, presence during the year. If you recruited somebody 6 months ago, they would receive half of what the other employee on the same pay level who's been here the whole year would receive. Obviously, presence is important. But those profit sharing schemes are very, very good because they are self-funded. Because if you're making more profit, yes, you will spend more, but you've made more profit. So you still have a bigger result for the organization, and everybody can contribute. So even people who are typically, you know, like far from, let's say, the traditional KPIs, everybody can contribute by, you know, switching off the lights, by, you know, not using too much water in when they're washing their hands in the washroom or whatever. Everybody can contribute to either reducing cost or to increasing revenue. So everybody can participate, and this is a great way to send also a positive message of hope to the organization, while at the same time you're making sure that you're still making a profit as an organization, and if you don't reach the threshold, you don't have to pay anything. So there's another type of scheme which is kind of similar. It's called gain sharing, and this one is for organizations where it's more difficult to determine, let's say, profit, or you want to have a comparison to some kind of historical reference point in terms of performance. And you tell the organization, I don't know, we used to produce 100 widgets per hour that have no default, okay? And we want to do some payment based on the reaching more than 100 widgets per hour with no default. And so you calculate the gains or the improvement, and then you can distribute a portion of that to the employees to encourage them to continue participating in the scheme. So those schemes will tend to be more in smaller sites where people can have a direct impact on the results, and where you can quantify quite easily the performance results. So that works very well in manufacturing, for example, in logistics and distribution, sometimes in healthcare and so on. So those can also be implemented in your own organization. And you can also implement spot awards and milestone awards. So the spot awards are, you know, kind of a financial recognition measure. When somebody has done something good, they can receive quickly an amount of money. Or you can have also milestone awards for, let's say, teams of people who are working on a project, and the project is very long-term, and so that's typical, for example, in construction, for example. And so when they reach certain milestones, they would receive an incentive at that point in time. So this is just to show to you that you can be very creative with the way that you're going to manage the variable pay of your employees. But those were like the classic, you know, compensation aspects of base and variable pay. But there are lots of other things that are going to help you in terms of the engagement, the retention, the recognition that you want to provide to your employees, and they don't necessarily cost a lot of money. So, of course, we all know that engagement, it's the result of the discretionary effort that employees are putting into their work, and that it does have a direct correlation to improved business results. We see that companies that have highly engaged employees can perform by up to 30% more. A highly engaged employee is 2.5 times more likely to exceed the performance expectations. And what we see as well is that over a quarter of employees that are not satisfied actually reduce the amount of effort that they put into work. So it does have a direct impact onto your productivity and your results. Now, Gallup has recently published the results of their State of the Workplace initiative for 2021. And I have picked here some of the numbers that stood out for me compared to global results. So the first one is that only 16% of employees in the Middle East and North Africa are engaged, while it's 20% on a global basis. And what you see here in the MENA column is that I've put in pink the numbers where MENA was not doing was doing worse than the global average, and those that have a pink background are where it's the worst in the world. So, for example, 57% of MENA-based employees says that COVID has affected their life a lot. It's more than global, but that's also the worst on a global basis. And what we see as well is that we see high numbers of people who worry, who are stressed, who are angry, who are sad, higher than globally, and even leading, unfortunately, on a global basis on some of those criteria. It's very, very unsettling to see that. And I just want to remind everybody that in a previous survey from Gallup, they had estimated that it takes 4 to 5 engaged employees to balance out the impact of a single one disengaged employee. So when you have numbers where only 16% of your employees are engaged, it is, I don't want to say it's a losing battle, but it means that we need to pay a lot of attention to how we can improve this engagement. And I know that this usually doesn't sound too much like a comp and ben topic, but actually you will see directly related. So how do we have sustainable engagement? The classic approach is, of course, to have motivation and attachment to the organization. But there's also, you will have more engagement when your people are empowered. And I think this is where we need to start to think about the tools that they have to do their job, the processes that support them, the quality of their manager, the clarity that they have about their role, the expectations, and ensuring that they can do their best. And the clarity about the role has a lot to do with comp and ben, in the sense that we are often in charge of dealing with job descriptions. And the third element is energy and well-being. If you don't have a healthy culture, if you don't have collaboration, if you don't have inclusion, the motivation and the engagement of the employee is going to shrink, because they will not feel that they are in the best environment in which they can do their best work. So what can we do? The first thing that we can do is look into retention schemes. And I'm highlighting that because this has become an issue in some of the, especially in some of the GCC countries that are still kind of closed to having people coming from outside the country to take on jobs. So they have to deal with, for the first time in this part of the world, a job market where there's not a constant influx of migrants, whether they are low skilled or high skilled, but migrants who come to take jobs. And all of a sudden, the GCC with the COVID lockdown found itself having to recruit from only within their own borders. And that was the first time that this was really happening in this part of the world. So most of the time we think that retention schemes, it's like one scheme for the whole company. It's a big secret. There are only 5% of the employees that are in there. It's a plan which lasts for 3 years and they get a bonus, you know, at the end, which is paid by check because even the payroll doesn't know and so on. And I think this kind of model of retention schemes has changed and should change. And there are three main types of retention schemes that you can design. One which is, and as you can see, from left to right, they go from the more people to the fewer people. So the first one is linked to potential of the employees. So those would be your key people. You know, if you do a 9-box grid, which looks at performance and potential, those would be the people who are in the high performance, high potential type of location on your grid, and where you have identified that they have more risk of leaving the organization. You run a few statistics. You find that a lot of your high potentials are leaving after 2.5 years of tenure in the company. So you kind of identify your high potentials that have 2 years of tenure. You know those people are more likely to leave. So you want to preempt them from leaving by putting them on the retention scheme to try and make it a bit more psychologically difficult for them to leave the organization. Then there are the people for whom you're feeling a lot of pressure because they're working on key projects. You don't want them to go because that would delay, for example, the introduction of your new product, which is going to help you. And then there are even fewer people that are people who are having key positions during a time of massive change. So, for example, just before an IPO, just before and after merger and acquisition, and so on. And those people don't have to be very senior. So I'll give you a real example. When I was with Apple, many years ago, I remember one day I was called by my boss, the global head of Comp and Ben. She told me, "Hey, Sandrine, Steve Jobs bought a company in Germany yesterday. We were not aware. So me and my colleague were flying out to Hamburg. You have to fly to Hamburg and we're going to meet with that company now because we need to do the due diligence." Well, it was a post-diligence because it was already signed, the agreement, but we need to have that discussion. And we extended a retention scheme to the accountant of that company that we had hired, who was the one who was doing a lot of the work. There was the CFO, but there was an accountant as well. And this person had been identified as the one who had a lot of knowledge of the organization, who was actually running things on a let's say, daily basis. And so we put him on the M&A retention scheme alongside with some of the CEO and so on. Of course, he did not receive the same amount, but he was still eligible. So this kind of scheme can go very deep in the organization and it's extremely individualized and it's really linked to a person rather than just a kind of position like you would have on the pressure type of retention scheme. So this is just to show you that you can have different types of retention schemes that you put in place at the same time in your organization. They're there to alleviate different things. And as you can see from left to right, typically those incentive plans, retention schemes, pay more for the ones where it's more rare and there are fewer people, and pay less for those people who are just being retained because we think that they might leave and we don't want them to leave, but there's not a specific risk or specific impact on the business. So as you can see, can move from 15-25% of annual gross salary, which would be basic pay plus guaranteed allowances, to 33 to 50% of annual gross salary as well. Now, just to give you a completely different example, just a few years ago, I used to work in a company and we had a competitor that was opening a mall, and we were doing malls, a small mall, you know, the Dubai mall, and they were poaching our UAE nationals that were working in the customer service booth, you know, where you go and you ask for your direction in where is this shop, where is that shop. And that Dubai Mall was going to open just a few months down the road, and they started to poach our Emirati customer service people. And so we wanted to retain them. And so the general manager of the shopping malls wanted to just give his employees 4 months of pay in order to retain them. And I told him, no, it's not going to work. You give them the money today, and tomorrow they resign. The money is in their bank account. They can resign and still go to your competition. This is not what's going to retain them. So we need to strike a balance between doing something now and doing something down the line. So eventually what we did is that we immediately gave people 2 months of basic pay. We told them, because we know that if you were to leave today, you would have a slightly bigger salary over there. So we don't want you to lose on that. And then after 4 months, if you stay with us for another 4 months, we will give you another 4 months of basic pay. So that would be 6 months of basic pay. Okay. The opening was after 3 months. Okay. So that deadline of 4 months ensured that our people would stay after the opening of the competitor, and therefore the threat of us losing them would bigly diminish strongly, because obviously they would have to have people in their customer service booth by the opening date. So there would be less risk. And I said, but you know what, if you want to know if your people intend to stay, you could tell them, or after the 4 months, you can choose to take 4 months of basic pay now, or if you stay with us another 6 months, we will give you, instead of 4 months, we will give you 8 months of basic pay. And the good thing of that is that it did not increase our cost that much, because it was a small employee population. It was a relatively low paid employee population. It did not engage us for a super long period. Most of the people actually chose to be paid after 4 months. So it cost us 6 months of basic pay, but it reduced our risk. And as you can see, that was a very, very customized retention scheme that was really designed for this specific situation, a very specific population, and not the typical type of employee population that you would immediately think of when you're talking of retention. But that was where we were feeling the challenge. And at that time, that was a very important thing for us to retain them. So we did what we had to do in order to retain them. So my message for you is, if you have to implement a retention scheme, I don't think that necessarily a blanket approach. You might feel the pressure coming from your competitors trying to hire your employees, but you have to really identify who should be on the incentive scheme and what kind of incentive scheme, how long you think that the threat of losing your employees is going to stay, and then design your retention scheme really to fit and to respond to that unique pattern that you are facing in your own organization. Now, if you want to keep your nationals, which are sometimes the population which is more at risk of leaving, I would say that my advice again is to say, should you target all the nationals? We all know that young graduates, irrespective of their nationality, they're millennials, they're at the beginning of their career. They will change jobs every 2 or 3 years anyway. So is there really a good benefit for the organization to try and retain those people when there's a natural cycle and so on? Maybe, maybe not. And maybe what you can try to think about is to create an alumni network, so that maybe you can let them go and then rehire them once they have acquired, you know, new skills, new competencies, new ways of thinking and so on in some other organization. But I would really suggest that you try to target mostly the nationals that are more difficult to hire because they're more experienced, because they have specific skills or whatever it is, and try to focus on those rather than some blanket approach. And I would say as well that you need to probably think about doing financial measures, but also you can do things around their growth and their development. For example, you could say, we're going to help you finance, I don't know, your MBA, your doctorate, you know, getting a new certification or something like that. And you put a reimbursement clause that if they leave after a certain period of time, they need to reimburse a portion of the amount that it costs to pay for their education. So that will help you not only to give them the growth, to give them the skills that they need, but also to keep them for a longer period of time, for example. So let me try the, I don't, Helen, are you here? How much time do I have left? I still have 20 minutes, I think.
Yes. Hi, Sandrine. Yes,
Yes.
we've got questions for you, Sandrine.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
So let me start. Just give me a second. Moving from room. Okay. The first one is, can a compensation? Do you want to come out of share screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So can a compensation plan be based only on competencies? Is the first question.
Theoretically, I would say yes. In a very pragmatic, practical manner, I tend to be somebody who does not react too well to theory approaches. I would say that I would recommend that only if you have an excellent way of not only defining your competencies in general, but defining the mastery of each level within each competency, assigning that to each job, so that then you can really evaluate and have practical ways of evaluating that, not just vague sentences that we tend to see in a lot of competency definitions. So if you have such a system, which means that you have a semi-objective way of evaluating the degree of competency of each person or each job family, then maybe you could do something based on that. But honestly, I don't think that most organizations are ready for that. And nowadays, in my opinion, the organizations that are most ready for that are those that have very specific technical skills, because typically it's easier to define technical skills. So they start with that before going into the behavioral competencies and so on. The thing that I would say that you might want to consider, if you do have a somewhat robust, doesn't have to be perfect, but a more robust set of competencies that are really part of how you're handling careers and so on, is that maybe you could try to tie your promotion system to mastery of competencies. So that would be one way of doing that. For example, when I was in, many years ago, I was in Microsoft, and we were quite good with that kind of stuff. And we had a system where we had functional competencies, like I participated in the design of identifying which technical skills for comp and ben we needed to have, and then defining each 5 levels within each of those. And then we said, for a comp and ben generalist in level, for example, 62, he or she needs to be at level 3 on competency 1 and level 4 on competency 2. And the next level up, it's a 4 on competency 1, so 1 more, and still a 2, and still a 4 on competency 2. And if you could demonstrate that on the total of competencies that were required, you were mastering 70% of the competencies at the level required for the next job, then you were eligible, not promoted. Again, I'm highlighting what I was saying earlier. You're eligible for promotion again. So that could be one way. But I wouldn't build a whole system based on competencies nowadays, because few organizations are truly capable of handling those competencies. So I think in the future will be better, but it's still a work in progress in many companies. I can't hear you, Helen.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think a lot of the audience can put that in place now. You've explained it so beautifully. So thank you so much, Sandrine. The next question is total rewards the same as comp and ben?
So comp and ben, well, yes, and again, no. Sorry for the ambiguous answer. Yes and no. Comp and ben used to be the old name. Nowadays, there tends to be a title of total rewards because it's based on compensation and benefits, but it also acknowledges that a lot of comp and ben people still also look into engagement, recognition, well-being, and so on. So look at a bigger picture of supporting the employee value proposition, basically. The only thing that we don't really directly handle is the development part. Though we can be involved through the promotion process and other things like that, you know, like changes of grades related to getting certifications and things like that. So, but really that's the core. So you hear comp and ben, you hear total rewards, you sometimes hear performance and reward, because in some organizations, performance management is part of comp and ben or total rewards. So it depends. It's kind of interchangeable, but technically it's a slightly different term.
Okay, just bear with me and
sure.
Switching between rooms, hold on. Okay, the third one is in the last question. Rewards and recognition is proven to improve employee morale and can result in a motivated workforce. How much more value does comp and ben plan add to employee morale?
Oh, that's a very good question. Actually, I was about, so how much time do I still have? Is it like 5 minutes, 20 minutes? How much? 0?
3 minutes to be precise.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Helen, I would like you to make the slides available to everybody because I didn't have time to go through everything I wanted to touch. But if you look at recognition, I think that recognition schemes are the one thing which I think is undervalued by most organizations. They typically cost on average 2% of total payroll, annual base salaries of your whole organization. You can have a very, very good recognition scheme put in place. And the new models of recognition are peer-to-peer based. So you have your annual or monthly awards, you know, the employee of the month or the employee of the year and so on, which are the traditional way of doing recognition where somebody is nominated by themselves or somebody else. There's a commission that selects the person who will receive the award and the CEO or the manager gives out the award, classic. But you also have modern ways of doing recognition, which is peer-to-peer, where you can give to employees either points or which may or may not be attached to a financial value, you know, like you can use the points maybe to redeem some gifts, you know, from a catalog. But or it could be just non-financial completely, but with badges and so on to say, thank you for helping me, you're a star, you're the best to support me, blah, blah, blah. And those are super effective. On average, companies that have a strong peer-to-peer recognition system have better customer satisfaction and better retention of and better revenue per full-time employee than companies that don't have peer-to-peer. And even better, the worst ones are the ones that don't have recognition at all. So there is a demonstrated correlation between having strong recognition schemes and having enhanced performance of the organization. So if you have only a small amount of money to spend, I would say revamp your recognition scheme or put one in place. That would be probably one of the things that you can do that would have a quick impact on the organization and a positive one. And at the same time, you can support the culture and the values like the previous speaker was talking about. You know, you've done maybe your work on your UGRs, as he was saying, and you can support the culture of the organization as well, because you can highlight those as part of the recognition scheme.
And also probably add some non-monetary rewards, right? Because not everything has to be monetary.
Exactly. People are motivated. You might remember the famous presentation by Dan Pink on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Financial motivation is important. It reaches a certain level, but people are motivated by things other than just financial. And how do we know that? Because at the moment where lots of people have lost their job, there are still some people who are resigning for their job, not necessarily going for another job, but because they want a job which is more aligned with their values, with where they want to be in their life, and not necessarily to make more money. So this has been demonstrated in the US. They were having unemployment payment by the federal government, which some states in the US stopped because they were saying, oh, people are too lazy, they're getting paid too much because they're unemployed, they don't want to get back to work. And the numbers that we see so far show that even when they stopped that extra payment, still people were not coming back to the jobs with the bad bosses, the toxic cultures, the terrible shift hours, the lack of flexibility in any way, shape, or form, and the very, very low pay conditions. So as soon as people got a chance to vote with their feet, they still did it. So it's not just all about the money. I think it's goes beyond that.
Also, Sandrine, I think monetary rewards are so momentary, right? But the non-monetary rewards have a lasting impression. Even when you grow old and you hold on a memorabilia,
very true.
You know, it's nostalgic. You bring back all of that buzz back into your life again.
Yes,
so
and
so impactful.
Exactly. And one other thing is that, especially in recognition, if you offer experiences to employees, so you might offer, let's say, for example, a voucher to the supermarket of 250 dirhams, or you might say, hey, for 250 dirhams, you can go, I don't know, ride a hot air balloon over the desert or whatever it is, I don't know. The people will have that memory in their head much longer than they will have the food in their pantry.
Absolutely.
But they can also share it on social media to the outside world, but also internally, if you have some kind of internal social media, Slack, Microsoft Teams, whatever you're using, or even the employee newsletter. And that's a good way to spread the goodwill and so on. So you have a double impact with those kind of non-financial experiential rewards.
Fantastic. That's a great spin that you added there. There's another question here. Should HR put the criteria for on-spot reward and incentives, or leave it to direct managers? How do we deal with inconsistency in evaluation among different managers?
Okay, so on-spot rewards typically have some criteria in terms of the payouts that can be given. So again, let me give you an example. High-tech world, a few years back, each manager had a budget of 5% of the quarterly salaries of their employees in their team, and they could distribute to one or two employees. It was use it or lose it. If you don't use it in the quarter, it's gone. Too bad. So most of them were using it, but they had a rule. They could not give less than 8% of annual salary to one person, not more than 12%. So 8 to 12 means it's about 1 month of base pay. And they had to explain why they had chosen that person in a system, but there was no, so there was kind of some vague criteria that were put in place. The manager had to put in the system, but had ownership of their budget. What would happen is that at the end of the quarter, HR would look at all the people who had received an award and look at if some managers were being very light in how they were describing, why they had chosen that person and so on, to come one-on-one to educate the manager to better select their employees. And there was another rule that was in place that no employee could receive the spot award more than twice in the same year. So that we made sure that, oh, I'm your boss. I love you, Helen. You work with me. I love you. I'm going to give you all the spot awards that I have available throughout the year because you're my favorite. We would prevent that. So you can put in place some rules, but they shouldn't be to a point where it stifles the decision making, because spot, it means instant. So it means that they should be able to give it at any point in time. It's not even at the middle of at the end of the month. It's on day 17 of the month. If somebody did something good, manager can go in the system, put it, and the person receives the check. And at the end of the quarter, we will in HR look and say, oh, you seem to be a bit, you need to be educated a little bit more on how to select your people. So you can handle the risk in that way.
Fantastic. That's all we have time for, Sandrine.
Thank
you so much. There are more questions in there, but we don't have the time. But I'm so thankful and grateful for sparing your time and being part of the HRM Summit. So blessed.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.